Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. So last time we saw that Krishna's first teaching to Arjuna, after telling him about the nature of the self, was practice forbearance. Tam stitikshasva, practice titiksha. And he gives the changes that are occurring in terms of heat and cold, happiness and suffering. When we encounter the self, then we'll be just immersed in it. Then no changes will affect us. But until we get that enlightenment, until we are able to not just think about the self, but actually experience it, until that time, what shall we do? And Krishna's answer is, until that time, learn to practice forbearance. Now, the next verse, which we'll begin today, on verse 15, Krishna describes how does the practice of forbearance help. So let's look at verse 15. Yam hinav yathayantyete purusham purusharshabha samadukha sukham dhiram somrutatvaya kalpate. O great amongst men, only the wise person whom these cannot disturb and who remains the same in pleasure and pain is fit for immortality. And so the first and the most important benefit of practicing forbearance is it makes us fit for immortality. Now it's a roundabout way of saying it makes us fit to know who we are. Because the self is immortal. The self has no birth, no death. It's the body that is born and the body that dies. The self is unchangeable. It is the mind that undergoes changes. Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it is not, sometimes it is excited, sometimes it is sad. The mind has all the changes, the body has all the changes, they come and go. What is changeless, what is steady, what is one, what is unique is the self. If I know I am that self, then I will know that I am birthless and deathless. Right now, why do I feel that I was born at some point in the past and at some point in the future I will die? It's actually simply, I don't know the exact psychological term for it. It's a kind of a transference. It's the body that was born at some point in the past, and it's the body that will go away sometime in the future. But instead of recognizing it's the body that comes and goes, I feel it's me who was born and it's me who will die. And which obviously means somehow my identity, my I-ness, my me-ness, if you like, has become associated with the body. Because I feel this is me, whatever happens to this seems to happen to me. And the main teaching of the Gita is, this is not me. The real me is beyond this body. The real me was never born, never die. Now, when I know that, I will know that I'm immortal. Right now, although we may be able to appreciate the idea, we still, at the end of the day, we just feel I'm still mortal. I'm still a human being. So what Krishna is saying is, until we get that knowledge about our true self, until that time, I should practice forbearance. And that's what he means by saying, only the wise person whom these cannot disturb, that is all these changes that are occurring. We know changes are occurring within us, changes are occurring outside us. Elections will happen, governments will change, people will change, they will come and go, and we may get affected by all these changes, positively or negatively. But what remains changeless is the self. If I focus on the change, I'll be affected by the change. If I focus on the changeless, then I can keep my own peace and my own joy. And that is what he means. Only the wise person whom these cannot disturb, these means this joy and sorrow, happiness and suffering, and who remain the same in pleasure and pain, is fit for immortality. Now, another reason to practice forbearance described in the next verse, verse 16. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubhayorapi drushtontah, tvanayos tattvadarshibhihi. This is one of the very key verses in the Gita. Pretty much if you look at it, every verse is like that. But the more you dig deeper into these verses, you begin to see how much depth each of these verses has. So this verse simply means the unreal never becomes real, nor does the real ever become unreal. The knowers of the truth know these both fully. So it's apparently a very straightforward verse. That which is real is always real. That which is unreal is always unreal. Now we might say, what's the point? Why are we being told this? And the reason we are being told this right now is because we are not seeing things clearly. Right now, what the Gita will say in future, and the Upanishads also use that phrase, for the deluded, we see that which is real as unreal, or that which is unreal as real. So this verse just simply says, that which is real is always real, that which is unreal is always unreal. Now to kind of dissect it a little bit, what it means is that just because something appears real doesn't make it real. Now let's go back to the rope snake analogy that we resort to very often because it helps clarify things. Now, if I mistake a coiled rope in a semi-lit room and think it to be a snake, now when I see the snake, I think the snake is real, which is why I'm afraid, which is why then I shout out for help or look for my gun, I do something. If I'm afraid of snakes, I find snake in my room, I'm afraid. And I'm afraid because if I knew it was an unreal thing, I wouldn't be afraid. So I am seeing the snake as real. But then, of course, I switch on the light and I find, no, it's only a rope. So even when I was seeing the snake, I was really seeing the rope. But the snake that I saw was real in my mind, although there was really no snake. So that which is unreal appeared as real to me, and the rope which was real all along, I didn't even see it. And because I didn't see it, the real rope became as if unreal, and the unreal snake became as if real. And so what this verse points out to us is that in life, it would happen quite a number of times that we will not be able to see the real as real, the unreal as real. Now, if I'm able to see the difference between the two clearly, then I become the knower of the truth. So right now, we are knower of the falsehood. This is the one big lie that all this world exists. The reality is the self alone exists. Now, this seems like an outrageous statement considering right from the time we were born, we are dealing with the world, we are dealing with the changes, we are dealing with the people. This is our default reality. And that's what makes it difficult. Not to understand this intellectually is easy. What makes it difficult to put it into practice is the muscle memory that we have developed is completely has to be reversed, because we grow up right from the time we begin to understand or figure things out with this conviction, this is all there. This world is there. That is why I see it. And so the reality of the objective world is never really questioned. And what this verse points out is, no, don't take anything in life for granted. Learn to question. So one of the strengths of Vedanta teaching is that it always encourages questions. That truth is never afraid of any questions. It's not just a question of, oh, just believe it. Don't ask any question. Just believe it. That would be terrible. What Vedanta teachers have said right from the beginning is, keep on asking questions. Keep on asking questions. And find answers. If there is a question, there will be an answer to it. If it's a silly question, there will be a silly answer. But there will be. Every question will have an answer. So not to be afraid to ask questions. So if you kind of dig a little bit deeper into this real and unreal. So they say that the effect, we know that we live in the world of cause and effect. No matter what happens, we have learned to say, why did it happen? What caused it? Everything around us, everything in us too. If suddenly some thought comes to my mind and I say, why did I think that? If there is something not going well with my body, then I say, what happened? Why did it happen? So this question, why, that we ask, that question becomes legitimate only because of the assumption that everything that happens has a cause. That's why we can say why. If anything could happen anytime for no good reason, then this why question can never be answered. And so there is a lot of thought given in Vedantic thinking about the relationship between cause and effect. And the example that is often given is of let's say, a jar made of clay. So a clay, and then you kind of make a jar out of, or the potter makes kind of a pots out of clay. So when I see a clay jar, well, why do I call it a jar? I call it a jar because it has the shape and form of a jar. It does the function of a jar. But I can look at the jar and see the jar, or I can look at it and say, it's really nothing but clay. A clay which has been put into a certain form. And that's it. So the clay here is the cause. And because the clay was present and there was somebody making these pots, that potter kind of gave it a particular shape, and then I say whether it's a jar or a pot or a glass or whatever. So the question is, does the form of the jar have any existence apart from the clay? Can I just take the jar and say, I don't want the clay, I just want the jar? I can't, because they're inseparable. Not only are they inseparable, but in a clay jar, the only reality is the clay. Because a clay jar is a clay jar only after it received the form of the clay, form of the jar, received the form of the jar. So before that clay was given that form, it was not a jar. After you break it up and powder it into pieces, it won't be a jar again. So it kind of has the the jar appears to be real, although the form itself is unreal because it has a beginning and it has an end. But the clay which constituted the jar existed before the jar was made. It will continue to exist after the jar is destroyed. And so, in a cause and effect relationship, the cause is always real compared to the effect. The effect is destructible. And that's how then we go to the ultimate cause, which alone is real, because all others are modifications, changes in that. And the same way, therefore, all of the changes that are occurring inside me, outside me, including heat and cold, joy and suffering, and physical, mental, emotional changes, and the changes in the world, none of these have any existence apart from the self, apart from Brahman. Just as the jar has no existence apart from the clay, all of these changes that are occurring inside and outside have no existence apart from Brahman. Now, if I'm able to look deeply and look at the real thing, I will see Brahman. Just like if I look deeply at that rope and snake analogy, if I look deeply, I will see the reality, the rope. I'm not afraid. If I'm not able to see the rope and I see the snake, then that unreal snake is going to terrify me. Exactly in the same way, all the changes that are occurring inside and outside me, if I have not acquired the ability to look deeply and clearly, then these changes, which are an effect, I'll be affected by them. Now, that's what Krishna's teaching is. Until I acquire the ability to look at the unchanging reality, if I don't want to be affected by these changes, then I must learn to forbear. And forbearance really means trying not to react. If I react to something, I'm kind of sold into that reality. And that's why many times the Vedantic teaching is be a witness. And sometimes we think, witness means just seeing everything. No, it's more than. It means seeing but not reacting. Because if I'm seeing changes around me and reacting, even if not, sometimes there may not be any visible reaction. So it might seem as if somebody just very serenely looking at things. But the mind inside could be reacting. Maybe I'm good enough to not show my reactions outside. But what it means is not reacting means not only that there is no visible reaction which can be seen by other people, but there should not be even this subtle reaction. Can I be just a camera? And I've said this before, that if there is a camera next to me here, the camera also sees what's in front, and my eyes also see what's in front. The difference is the camera doesn't react. The camera is actually a real witness. Now, can I be like the camera? Because otherwise, when I look, I immediately then decide, this is this person, these are these objects, I like this, I don't like this. All these ideas are just a form of reaction. And so that is really what is said. Krishna says, until you are able to see that unchanging reality, try to practice forbearance. So, about changes, one thing good to keep in mind as we continue this study. So, there are at least two kinds of changes that occur in life. One is called parinama. Parinama means transformation. The other, you could say, is an apparition. In Sanskrit, they call it vivarta. So, to give an example, for instance, milk changing into yogurt. Now, I think chemically probably the two still are identical, but clearly it's a non-reversible change. Milk can be made into yogurt, but you say, no, it's too much yogurt, I want milk back. Sorry, you can't get it. So it's one way. But a rope changing into a snake, it's reversible. Well, really, there is no change has occurred really. So these are the two kinds of changes. One is a kind of change you find in milk and yogurt, or any of these other changes that occur in life. That's parinama, it's actual transformation. And the other change is an apparent change, which feels as if things have changed, but really nothing has changed. So that is what is meant by this verse saying, if you go back to the verse, the unreal never becomes real, nor does the real ever become unreal. The knowers of the truth know these both fully. What are these both? These two things are the real and the unreal. So the word for knower of the truth is called Tattvadarshi. It's a very interesting way this word has come. Tat. Tat means that in Sanskrit. That's why that famous statement, Tattvamasi, you are that. So Tat means that. Tattva, although it's not a word, you can think in terms of the quality of being that, or thatness. Yeah, I'm just kind of making a word of my own. So in other words, anything in this world, living or non-living, small or big, I may not know the name of every entity, but there is one universal name for everything, and that is that. If there is an object there, and I don't know what that object is, and I can say, could you please bring that? And person understands. So that is a word which can be applied, a noun, which can be applied to anything in this universe. And therefore, Tat stands for Brahman, the only reality, because it's applicable to everything. Tattvadarshi, one who is able to see thatness, that Brahman. So Tattvadarshi, therefore, gets translated often as the knower of truth. Tattva is the truth, Brahman. So what does knowing these both fully mean? It means simply that the real is always real and the unreal was never ever real. In other words, there is no such thing as a temporary reality in life. This is important to keep in mind, because sometimes people get shocked or horrified or scandalized that, oh, this world is not real. And you say, how can you say not real? I'm seeing it, I'm living in it. So this is important to keep in mind, that what does it mean that there is no such thing as a temporary reality? If something is real, Sat or Satya, it's always eternal, Nitya. And that's how our mind works. Think about it this way. Even though when I go to sleep and dream, and the dream appears very real, and that time, of course, I don't even know it's a dream. When I wake up, how is it that I'm able to dismiss my dreams, no matter how terrible they may have been, and you can just say, oh, that was just a dream. But I cannot so easily dismiss this waking world. And the only reason how we are able to make that distinction between a dream and this world is simply a dream is temporary. A dream doesn't continue. It just started when I was asleep. When I woke up, it just vanished. On the other hand, compared to the dream, this world seems to have some form of continuity. The world that I saw before going to bed seems to be the same world that I see the next morning. And therefore, because of this persistence of the world, it appears to be real. And so, this is the way we think. So, if the dreams are unreal because they are just temporary, can we apply this insight to everything in life? We just need to be consistent. A lot of times you will see that the main teaching of the Gita is easy to understand. It's very logical. The only problem is we are not consistent. Even when we understand that if something is temporary, like the dreams, it is not real. But then there are a lot of other temporary things in life. We treat them as if they are real. But if we are consistent, if this makes sense, that if something is temporary, like dream, it's not real, then everything that is temporary should not be treated as if it is real. And so that is what is meant by saying real is always real and unreal is always unreal. And somehow we are programmed to like, and this is going to sound very odd, we don't like reality. We want to talk, we like to talk about it, but we don't actually want it. What most of us want are unreal things, things which are make-believe. And there is a story, sometimes they tell the tradition, and that is once Vedanta teacher was going for a walk along with a few of his students. And as they were taking a walk through the city, they saw in one place there was a big tent. And there was a big advertisement outside, said, one of the most outstanding mimics in the world has arrived. And this mimic can make the sound of a puppy perfectly. So well that even other puppies don't know that it's a human being making that sound. And so lots and lots of people were, and of course you had to buy a ticket to get in there. So people bought tickets and went to see, and they were amazed. Here was this one person sitting on a chair, and when the hall was full, he would make a sound of the puppy, and if you close your eyes, you would actually think there's a puppy there. And everyone clapped and said, this is the best ever. We had never seen something like this before. And so this Vedanta teacher, he took his students inside and they saw it. And then the teacher felt, oh, this is a good opportunity for a teaching. So then he asked the students, he said, just on the other side of the road, why don't you pitch even a bigger tent and even have a better publicity blitz that here is even more superior mimic has come, who can make even better, even more natural sound of the puppy. And of course, because this advertisement, new tent, a new advertisement was even more effective, all the people who were going there, they said, oh, now we have got a better one here. So they started coming here. That's the kind of times in which we live. We're so much influenced by advertisements. And so when all these people came, and the students are wondering, like, who is this mimic who's going to do it? And the teacher said, I'll be the one who'll do it. And so when the hall was full, the teacher sat there. And everyone's tense, everyone's waiting. And he just made such an amazing sound. Everyone clapped, and there's a huge standing ovation for that. And then after that, he said, wait. And then from under his chair, He actually took out a real puppy, which was making that sound. Now, when people saw that they were cheated, it was not this person, it was just a puppy sound. And then they said, demanded all the money back. They said, why should we be paying money to listen a puppy making a puppy sound? Because, well, we got a puppy at home. We don't need to come here to see it. And the teacher told the student, return everyone's money. We are not doing it to make. So everyone's money was returned. And the students were wondering, like, what's the point of all this? Then the teacher said, look, this is the nature of the world. A puppy making a puppy sound, they don't like it. They don't want it. They want a human being making a puppy sound. So they are willing to pay for it, willing to pay for something unreal, but something which is genuine, which is truth, they don't want it. That's our situation. There is this one infinite reality, the divine being, the presence of the divine, who is in front of me, behind me, the side, above, below, inside, outside, is this one divine being. That's the reality. Not interesting. All of us get so much sucked into this multiplicity, this division, this variety, these changes that are outside. This is what interests us. In fact, if some days nothing is happening, people get bored. And so, of course, now with social media and computers and all of this, there's always something to stimulate us, something to, if you find nothing much is changing, go to the internet, watch a movie, look at the television. So there's this constant bombardment of changes occurring, and then we feel, oh, now I'm enjoying life. So that is what is meant by saying that somehow we don't want the real. That we have gotten so used to the unreal, constant change of names and forms, which beginning and ending, everything is transitory in the world. Nothing remains permanent. Everything is changing. But that is what attracts our attention. And the one changeless reality remains forgotten. We saw last week about how it's the movie that grabs our attention. If we just have to sit there and look at this changeless screen, people say, oh, it's boring. But of course, that analogy has to be understood in a proper sense, because we are not really seeing the screen. I am the screen. When so long as these images are foisted upon me and I am reacting to them, I've forgotten that I am the screen. And therefore, I'm affected by all the images that are projected on me. That's the idea. So, since there is always this real and unreal in my experience, so what is that real which always exists? If real is always real, unreal is always unreal, the knowers of truth know it, and I'm confused about what is real and what is not real. The snake appears as real to me. The real snake, the real rope, I'm not aware of. So what is that real? And that is described in the next verse. That is, what's the number? 17, yes. Avinashitu tad vidhi yena sarvamidam tatam vinasham avyyasyasya na kaschit kartum arhati. Know for certain that whatever pervades all this is indestructible. No one can destroy this immutable. By immutable, it meant the real. And so, the reality is that which pervades everything that we see inside us and outside us is pervaded by one reality. and that reality itself cannot be destroyed. And one of the examples that often is given in books is space. Now, space itself is clearly, it's still a part of the material world, but that's the closest we can come to getting some idea about what indestructibility means. For instance, we have these several clay jars here, and I can get a baseball bat or something, and if I'm in a mood to whack them and then just kind of break them all into pieces, I can destroy the pieces of the jar. I can destroy their form, but I cannot destroy the clay itself, nor can I destroy the space which was occupied by these jars. The space is indestructible. So oftentimes the word akasha is used in these texts to refer to space. And so the closest we can come to in our present level of understanding to think about Brahman is just like space pervades entire creation. It's outside, it's inside, it's everywhere. It's even within two atoms. It's actually inside the atom, where the protons and electrons are there. So there is space even there, and there is space outside. So just like space pervades everywhere, there's one reality, Brahman, the self, pervades everywhere. So that is the real which always exists. So the knowers of truth means those who are able to never forget that there is this one unchanging reality. And now, although I'm speaking about atoms and molecules, and I'm using the word reality, don't think about the unreality as like a material existence. That reality is living, it's pure consciousness. In fact, other than that reality, everything else is nothing but atoms and molecules, electrons and protons. And actually, even electrons and protons, however subtle an isolated electron might seem to be, but the material world is even subtler than the electron. The material from which the mind and the intellect and thoughts and memories are made, those are also material, far more subtle. Even modern science has no equipment to, I don't know how much, even whether there are instruments to see an isolated electron. Maybe you have a beam of subatomic particles which they may be able to measure or see. But just have an isolated smallest particle and think about these realities, material, calling them realities, it's actually problematic, but these material seeming existences which are even subtler than an electron. So just like space pervades all objects, Brahman pervades everything. Now, immutable, avyaya is the word in Sanskrit. Immutable means that which does not undergo any change. Doesn't increase, doesn't decrease, doesn't change in any way. Now, it's good to remember that for changes to occur, it's important to have parts. Because really, all changes of any kind in the world is nothing but a rearrangement of the parts. Rearrangement of things. If something is without parts, then there is no change possible in that one. And that's why if you want a machine to have a longer life, the fewer movable parts it has, the longer it will stay. Because every time you have a moving part inside a machine, there is always a theoretical possibility that something could go wrong. It will get loose, it will come apart, things like that. And that's why some years ago, earlier, even laptops and things like that, they had several parts. There was the body, and you find all the screws and all those things. And then maybe around 20 years ago or 15 years ago or something, Apple came up with, and they called it a unibody, which really meant reducing the number of parts in a laptop, to have the whole chassis made of just one metal piece. And the idea was then, the fewer the parts we have, moving parts, the longer it will stay. Brahman, or the self, or the Atman, has no parts. And that's why it is considered immortal. Because what is mortality? Why do we say the body is mortal? Because body is so many parts. It has all the limbs. Not just the limbs. Every limb itself is made up of these material particles. And that's why ultimately it is said that after death, dust returns to dust. We just become a heap of ashes. And because there are these parts, that's why Swami Vivekananda put it well in the first talk he gave actually in the Chicago Parliament on 19th September, I think, in 1893. So this is what he says, that every composition presupposes a certain future decomposition. So the body is composed of particles, and if there is some force holding these particles together, and if that force comes apart, all the individual particles will then return back. And that's why decomposition presupposes that sometimes something was composed and then it gets decomposed. But the Atman was never composed of anything, and therefore the Atman can never decompose. There are no parts which came together to form the Atman, and so therefore the Atman is immortal. And that's why the word here is avyaya, immutable. No one can destroy this immutably real. Now just think about this. If I know that I am that immutable, there will be no fear. Right now, all fear and anxiety that comes to us is because I'm going to be affected by something. It could be physical, it could be psychological, it could be emotional, it could be any number of things. But once I know that I'm this unchanging, immutable reality, you won't be afraid of anything. So we will stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments.
Hari Om Swamiji. Swamiji, the self is real. Is the awareness of the self real?
The self is awareness. So it's like awareness of awareness. So awareness is just like the example they often give is just like if I have a source of light, then if I take that source of light in a dark room, then that light will help illuminate whatever is in that room. But now how do I see that source? I don't need another light to see the source, because the light of the source lights the source as well. So it is self-illuminating. And so similarly, the self itself is awareness. And so the self is aware of itself and aware of anything else, if there is anything else.
Pranam Swamiji, how do you practice being a witness and not reacting? How do you do that? Because it's so difficult to. But how do you not react? Like, for example, you gave an example. I see some object. Automatically, I'm going to think about the shape of it, the color of it, the placement of it, the weight of it, things like that. Mm-hmm. But how do I not do that? How do I practice not doing that?
Good question. One of the ways to do it is to learn to not react. I mean, again, it just occurs through practice. I mean, if I remember that I am the Atman, or I am a child of God. I mean, the simple way, a little easier way would be, if I can focus on a deeper reality, then this more superficial reality will not affect me. So, for instance, now, if we remember, for instance, that God exists in every person, or even better, that everything, living or non-living, that exists around me, if it is true that God is all-pervading, then God has taken all these different forms. It's the same clay in different forms. The way I will react then, if I have this at the back of the mind, will be very different than if I just see everything is separate and things like that. So there will be a reaction, but this reaction of trying to see the reality will be a different reaction than trying to see the unreal as real. So yes, and again, it's not something that will happen overnight, but it is something that also will not happen on its own. So unless I make conscious effort to remain unaffected by this, I am going to react. And simple thing like we now go through this season cycle in New England area. There is winter and there is summer. And of course, we need to take care of the body, see that when it's winter, we need to protect ourselves from cold. When it's summer, we deal with the heat that's there. But if I react to it in a way that, oh, it's so cold, it's so hot, and if that is what takes away my mind, then I'm really sucked out into this unreal thing ultimately, heat and cold, all these polarities, and forgetting the real, which is me. Now, it doesn't mean that if I focus on the unchanging Atman, to the extent I am successful in doing it, I may not feel heat and cold, but we are not going to be able to do it right away. But even an imperfect practice of that will at least give us enough strength to stop complaining about it, to stop grumbling about it. And that itself is a good move in that direction. That yes, we are still reacting, we are still feeling the heat and cold, but at least I'm not, the more visibly I react, the more I get sucked into that unreal thing. And the example I gave last time was about watching a movie. Of course, when you're watching a movie and if it's a well-made movie and the story is very moving, you're going to get moved by that. But if, even when I'm moved by it, if I don't ever forget that it's still a movie, then I'm able to hold my balance better. And sometimes you'll see, sometimes when we were very little, and then it's a horror movie, sometimes children will sit like that. They want to see the movie, but they are also terrified by it. So they sometimes will sit like this and then close this thing and see. That's what we're doing with life. And yeah, so again, it's a struggle. It's not very easy. It's not impossible, but it will not happen by default unless we strive to do that.
Maharaj, in our life, everything is unreal.
Except yourself.
Except myself. Okay. But is it possible to see real to unreal some of the time?
What do you mean some of the time?
Sometimes in our life, we see something unreal. So, is it possible to do that? Or I might have misunderstood.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I mean, clearly, yeah, please sit down. Yeah, it's true that even when we are trying to make an effort to hold on to the thought of the real, and to the extent we succeed in doing that, the world might look a little unreal. But because of our samskaras and because of our ways of thinking, once again it will become real. And so it's always kind of a back and forth. And so therefore, the more often we keep on remembering this, then the less often we will forget. I mean, essentially, that's also the principle behind japa. A japa is nothing but a short prayer. And we might say, why do I have to keep on repeating it again and again and again and again? Because the mind has gotten so used to forgetting it. The hope is that if I keep on repeating it somehow, then the mind will learn to hold on and recognize that that is something more real than everything else I encounter when I'm not repeating God's name. And so it's almost like pushing it deep inside our heart. And that's why repeated practice, repeated study is so much stressed. Now this Gita that we are studying, and for many of us, it's not the first time we are reading it. Many of us have read it before. But we know that we need to keep on reading it over and over and over again, because our not reading or not remembering samskara is much stronger than the remembering samskara. It's like that the babysitter, she goes to the parents of the baby she's taking care of and says, I'm telling this baby to sit, and she doesn't sit. And then the parents say, use your willpower, use your willpower. And then the babysitter says, the baby's won't power is stronger than my willpower. And so that's essentially the thing, that our mind has gotten so used to not thinking about God that we have to force the mind to think about it and kind of make the mind unlearn those older habits and learn these newer habits. And as always, unlearning is always more difficult than learning. Learning something new is easy. Unlearning all the baggage, that's the tough part. Yeah, it's like ordering something from Amazon is easy. But then going into your basement and cleaning up all the stuff that has gotten accumulated, that's tough. It's a little bit like that. Okay, so we will stop here today. And next time when we begin, we'll begin with verse number 18. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu.